So we're going to do another in-depth Torah study together today, exploring different aspects of our world and holding it up to the wisdom teachings from our tradition. What I want to explore today is a difficult subject, the subject of hate, and why it is that hate seems to be on the rise in the world. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to do this, but we're going to be reading about QAnon this morning. And a question that I want us to consider in our conversation to begin, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from this article by Gregory Stanton in justsecurity.org. Why is this happening right now? That's a question I want us to keep in mind, and you can share your thoughts in the chat, and then Deb can read them. Start thinking about that as I'm reading. A secret cabal is taking over the world. They kidnap children, slaughter, and eat them to gain power from their blood. They control high position in government, banks, international finance, the news media, and the church. They want to disarm the police. They promote homosexuality and pedophilia. They plan to mongrelize the white race so it will lose its essential power. Does this conspiracy theory sound familiar? It is. The same narrative has been repackaged by QAnon. The plot as described above was the conspiracy revealed in the most influential anti-Jewish pamphlet of all time. It was called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was written by Russian anti-Jewish propagandists around 1902. It collected myths about a Jewish plot to take over the world that had existed for hundreds of years. Central to its mythology was the blood libel, which claimed that Jews kidnapped and slaughtered Christian children and drained their blood to mix in the dough for matzahs consumed on Jewish holidays. The Nazis worshipped Adolf Hitler as the leader who would rescue the white race from this secret Jewish plot. America had its own dark side. Henry Ford echoed Nazi hatred of Jews and had 500,000 copies of the protocols printed and distributed in the US. Father Coughlin preached the protocols on national radio. The Ku Klux Klan combined its white supremacist racism with hatred of Jews. QAnon's conspiracy theory is a rebranded version of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Anybody have any reflections? Why is it back? Why on earth is it back? Deb, do we have anybody?
Nothing yet.
I see some people might be typing. Yeah, it's back. I think that's...
Here's one from Amy. Because in general, hatred has been unleashed.
So, hatred is something that has been unleashed. By the way, if you have not seen the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, I very much recommend it. It is not easy watching, but it is incredibly important that each and every one of us watch that. It's something that we all have a general idea of. I had a pretty good idea of how social media has helped to unleash hatred, but this really shows you quite graphically how it works and what it has done in order to promote a culture of releasing this whole culture of hatred that has been spreading like wildfire in our time. And I would argue that what we're seeing at the very top echelons of our government with our leader right now is an effect of that phenomenon.
So yes, we have several. Never left. Hatred never left. It waxes and wanes, but never goes away. Another one is the presidential voice legitimates bigotry. Going too fast. It's attempting to blame others than to take responsibility for the ills in our society. Scapegoating is a common human reaction to hard times, and there's a long history of scapegoating us. It's easy to spread on social media and sanctioned by some in power. Also, we are siloed in our media choices and directed to certain views.
I just want to comment again. I'm talking about that social media phenomenon. That documentary does talk about, for example, Pizzagate. I remember that one. Ping Pong Pizza on Connecticut Avenue, right near my old house. That was promulgated by social media. What I think is very important is that it's not necessarily just our choices of echo chambers. What's happening is the algorithms of social media are designed to build on our choices and heighten things that will constantly get us more and more angry and engaged. So Pizzagate was actually created by algorithms, by building one crazy person's idea on top of another. So that's an example of what I was just talking about before. And indeed, at the top now, that's being used for the purposes of power in the same ways that Hitler did this in Nazi Germany. But now one could argue even much more effectively with the reality of social media. So with all of this as a background, what I would like us to do is do a perusal now of Jewish wisdom teachings on hatred. And what do we do with this pernicious, constantly recurring problem of our human propensity to hate? What indeed does Judaism teach us about this? Okay, so that's what we're going to investigate together now. So I'm going to cut down now. This is from the book of Leviticus. It says, Lo tisnat achicha bilavavecha. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. So what is being said here? Don't hate your kinsfolk. Anyone notice anything problematic about this teaching in reference to, for example, the day and age we live in? What might be difficult about this particular mitzvah, in your opinion, in order to fulfill this mitzvah, either in this day and age or in any time, actually? Anyone want to comment on what might be surprised? The rabbis picked up immediately on one of the things that's deeply problematic about this mitzvah in the book of Leviticus.
We have one. Our economic system is relegating the working class to poverty and serfdom. No wonder that the underclass resents the elites, and social media has allowed this resentment to gel.
Okay, so, Karl Marx was onto something. He definitely picked up this. Part of the recurring problem of hatred is the consistent oppression and repression of the poor by the wealthy. I think that's true. And so that plays into it. So therefore, why is this a difficult and problematic text? Anybody?
There's a few more. The hard part about this teaching is that it says in your heart. That's when you're actively being hated, it's really hard not to hate back.
Yes.
It limits our concern to our own tribe.
Yes.
Also talks about what is in your heart, not your behavior. How do you define kinsfolk? Who are kinsfolk?
Good. So I'll just pause there, Deb.
Okay to hate outwardly.
So it says, Lo tisnat achicha, your brother or your brethren. So it seems that in Leviticus, it's just talking about other Jews. So if they're not Jewish, so you can hate them? Okay, you could just, and frankly, that's what happens. You see a lot of, the more traditional you get in the Jewish community, the more there's an us versus them mentality, which I think many of us know in our day and age doesn't get us anywhere. Until we recognize that all humanity is achicha, we're never going to overcome our propensity to hatred. That is one idea here. And the other idea here that I think has been brought forward is, how do you not hate in your heart, particularly if you know somebody hates you? How can you possibly, and this is an age-old question in Judaism, how do you either command somebody to feel something, or how do you command somebody not to feel something? Psychologists will tell you that's nonsense. You can't command to feel or not to feel. That's a recipe for disaster right there. And our ancient rabbis recognize this. And so that's what I want us to explore now as we look through our various texts. So for example, we have this text from the book of Exodus that says, when you encounter your enemy's ox or donkey wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the donkey of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must, nevertheless, raise it with him. So this is fascinating and really quite brilliant. What is the Torah trying to do here? what is, to see if you can put into your own words, how is the Torah talking about not hating? And by the way, well, let me just let's wherever you go with it. What do you think here? Anybody? Deb, any?
Not yet. I'm watching.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I think they're typing.
That's
It's coming, and then
the problem. You don't have to be able to type.
There we go. Using actions to reflect change.
Yeah. So, in profoundly Jewish fashion, the idea is, what it means not to hate can only be spoken of in terms of what you do. And this is quite an extraordinary command, because it is asking you to do something that is utterly counterintuitive. You would never want to, if you see your enemies, enemy in trouble with their animal, fell under its load, you'd think you would say, good, let them suffer.
Couple more. Work together toward a common goal. Even though someone hates you, that person is still a person, and we should behave towards the personness and not the enemy. Maybe we aren't supposed to know what to do, but we're asked to search, to choose to act with compassion no matter what.
Yeah.
Opportunity to forgive and allow your compassion to supersede hate.
Yeah. So I really think all of that, and it's so, and those are beautifully written, by the way, responses. The idea that you respond to the humanity of the enemy, even though they are your enemy, they still are human beings. And that is a tall order, isn't it? That is an incredibly painful, difficult thing to do when we think about the people who are enemies of everything that we believe in our world right now. When we think of QAnon and the people who are succumbing to this and rushing back to these age-old anti-Semitic tropes, would we really respond to their humanity? Can we? I want to continue now a little bit. This is a discussion on this from the Talmud of a Metzia. The Gemara suggests, come in here, proof from a Braita. A Braita is an ancient text from the same period as the Mishnah. If one encounters a friend whose animal collapsed and it is necessary to unload its burden, and one also encounters an enemy who needs assistance to load a burden onto his animal, the mitzvah is to assist the enemy in order to subjugate one's evil inclination. The Gemara reasons, and if it enters your mind that the requirement to prevent suffering to animals is by Torah law, that option to unload his friend's animal is the preferable course of action for him. The Gemara answers, even if the requirement to prevent suffering to animals is by Torah law, even so, loading his enemy's animal in order to subjugate his evil inclination is preferable. Very interesting. Yeah.
Maya Uretsky says, sometimes you have to put aside your feelings and think of the bigger picture.
Biduk, absolutely. And that is incredibly hard. Now, the Gemara takes it one step further. One has your friend's donkey is collapsed, and so it's suffering, and the enemy's donkey is he's just loading something on. So not only do you have to do something for the enemy, but you have to put aside not only your hatred, but your humanity of seeing an animal suffer. Even before you help the suffering animal, you have to go and do something kind, help him load the donkey for the enemy. So this is taking it exponentially even further, right? And the Hebrew says, "Kedei lichof et yitzro," in order to push away yitzro, your yetzer hara, right, your evil inclination, right? So the Talmud is suggesting that, yes, when you know that somebody hates you, your yetzer hara says strike back, right? Hit back, attack, right? To dehumanize. And this is saying you have to lachof et yitzro, you have to push with all of your might your yetzer hara away, even if you want to help the animal, which is so hard. I'm an animal lover. This is a really difficult one for me to read personally, and I'm sure for many of us as well. No, you have to let the animal suffer, and you have to force yourself to help the enemy first.
Mark Lieber wants to know, so I've got to figure out how to help QAnon raise their camel?
Yes.
And there's a few more. I wonder how this plays about how Netanyahu is dealing with the Palestinians. Another one is, it works if your enemy does not consider you to be his or her enemy. But if you know that your enemy wants to kill you, how can you be commanded to help him or her? Another one is, I see a guy with Trump lawn signs and he's exhausted. Should I help him?
Wow, so many different, each of
Yeah.
these is a whole discussion unto itself. I wish I could address all of these. Yeah, so the question we have to ask is, so what does this mean with regard to a QAnon, right? And then what does it mean to somebody who's actively trying to kill you? Well, that's a separate discussion. If somebody is running after, this is called the rodef. If somebody is running after you with a knife or shooting a pointing gun at you, what is your obligation? You have to kill that person. You can't. That's pikuach nefesh. So that's different. If somebody is actively trying to kill you. On the other hand, you can say, isn't QAnon trying to kill me? I mean, you know, they're our enemy. They espouse beliefs that ultimately lead to genocide, don't they? That's exactly because they espouse exactly the same beliefs that led to Nazi Germany and to the Holocaust. So here, where they're not actively in the act of murdering you, you have to metaphorically help them load their donkey. It's an extraordinary teaching. And it really, it leaves, it frankly, on some level, leaves me rather speechless. So let's just sort of, you know, sit with that for a moment. I want to go through some other teachings now. Here we have Maimonides. How can one Jew hate another? Does not the Torah state, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart? If, as our sages say, he alone saw him transgressing a commandment, warned him, but the sinner did not repent, in such a case it is mandatory to hate him until he repents and mends his ways. Yet even if he has not yet repented, he must in an emergency be helped out to unload and load. A little bit to unpack there. First of all, I want to acknowledge he's just talking about Jews here. So there are differences set up in the halachic traditional system between what you do with Jews and what you do with non-Jews. So, you know, the Maimonides certainly even sees enemy as somebody who's an enemy within the Jewish people. So I am deliberately extending these teachings to our world today, where we don't simply say that Jews are more human than non-Jews. We don't believe such a thing anymore. We don't accept such a thing. So we can apply these teachings. I'm just making this assertion now as a modern rabbi, that we approach this to all the world. And so here he's saying that you have to warn somebody for their wrongdoing, right? And then if they ignore you, he's saying, yeah, okay, hate them, right? But you still have to help them load and unload. So he has a very different take on this. He's sort of acknowledging that hate is going to happen. So I just wanted to bring that in. Deb, any other comments come in?
Yeah, a couple of others. Could the possibility of changing your enemy's mind be considered saving a life?
Absolutely.
I think this highlights our dedication to equity and ensuring we are all operating on a level playing field. And from Alan Elsner, David Ben-Gurion said that when the lion lies down with the lamb, I want to be the lion.
I never heard that quote. That's a great quote. Yes, very, very true. Indeed, that is true. On the other hand, you know, even if you feel that you are the lamb, because almost always, and this is the teaching, right? Your Yetzer Hara is going to make you assume that you're the lamb, and therefore you can't. I'm not going to lie down with no lion, because the lion's trying to kill me. Nevertheless, you have to approach that lion, and you have to help him load his donkey, right? And that's the power of this teaching here. So here's safer. Yeah, go ahead.
One more from Debbie Ross. Maybe this is just aspirational to get us to be compassionate even to those we hate.
I would agree with that, Debbie, but to a certain extent, I want to push back a little bit because of the emphasis on action and behavior. It's not simply an inner decision of your intention, but the Torah seems to be suggesting direct action of going into your enemy's personal space, as it were, and doing an active gesture of kindness, Now, the rabbis, as you see, are not clear on whether or not you know, what do you do with the hate you feel, but you have to then do the action. And so maybe it's more than simply feeling compassion. Sefer HaChinuch, one must not hate a Jew in one's heart, for it is stated, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart. Sefer explains that this commandment refers to secret, but not to manifest hatred. He who hates openly transgresses the prohibition, thou shalt not take vengeance nor bear any grudge, and the precept, love thy neighbor as thyself. Nevertheless, secret hate is more pernicious than open hatred, and the Torah condemns it with special emphasis. So this kind of supports both dimensions, Debbie. The idea that you know, you can't even have the secret hatred. The Torah has to come up with a separate line about it to replace that with compassion. So this is a very strong, but you also have to act. Right, you also have to. You can't just lay it at the feet of feelings, but also at actions as well.
So Judy Platt says sometimes the action creates its own meaning.
Exactly, and that's really that's what all of Judaism is about, right? Actions are Torah, right? Sefer HaChinuch continues. This commandment applies everywhere at all times to male and female alike. Those who transgress it and allow their hearts to harbor hatred against a blameless fellow Jew violate his negative commandment. But it is permitted, even obligatory, to hate the wicked if after repeated warnings they persist in their iniquitous conducts, as it is stated, do I not hate, O Lord, those who hate thee, and do I not strive with those who rise up against thee? Aha, so suddenly the Sefer HaChinuch is saying there are those people, though, who go so far as you can only hate them. So there you have it. You know, there are people who, even after they should know better, they've been given warnings and they still do the wrong thing. Those people, it's okay to hate. Do that with that Sefer HaChinuch's perspective. But now we have Rabbi Simcha Dvinsk in Meshech Chochmah, who comes out with this. Is it permitted to hate? Does the Torah not command, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart? The Talmud answers it that it is allowed to hate a person who has committed a sin. However, this was before the sin of the golden calf, when all of Israel were a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Then it was permitted to hate the blatant sinner. Not so after Israel's repeated sinning. Henceforth, whenever encountering a sinner, we must examine our own conduct, which is not free of faults. Therefore, it is forbidden to hate anyone unless one's own behavior is blameless. Right? So I love this. He's taking it and he understands that there are those who condone hate. And he's saying, that's before the golden calf. But now we're all sinners. So hate to say it, he sounds a lot like a guy named Jesus, right? Let he who has not sinned cast the first stone. I remind you, he was also a nice Jewish boy. So he's saying something that is grounded in Jewish perspectives and teachings as well, as we see here in Meshech Chochmah. That, and here it's grounded in this idea that because we are all equally capable of hatred and in transforming our hatred into violence and genocide, because we're all equally capable of that, is from that place that we have to begin and not put ourselves as separate, and therefore we cannot hate. We have to transform our actions into kind actions and moral actions and ethically good actions. Right. Now here's, I just want to start taking it in this direction with Nachmanides. He says, he who hates his fellow violates a positive commandment. In my opinion, the act of rebuking is meant here, as practiced by Avraham when he reproached Avimelech concerning his wells. So if he's saying something very important here. To take you back to the opening verse. Right? What does it say? It says, you shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your neighbor. It says, hochech tochiach. You shall reprove your kinsman, damitecha, but incur no guilt. The idea here in Judaism is called tochacha. Tochacha is a sacred act in Judaism. You are supposed to be willing to take criticism as a Jew. This is a whole sermon I can give unto itself. That it is considered a good thing, a wonderful thing, if another Jew or another human being in our world has the courage to come to you and point out your faults. That not only is that a good thing, but in a Jewish perspective, that's a mitzvah. You must rebuke one who is going the wrong way. right? And so Nachmanides says that this is actually what this is talking about. This isn't about loading and unloading donkeys. This is about our obligation to call out evil in the world when we see it. And here's from Arachin, the Talmud, from where is it derived with regard to one who sees an unseemly matter? In another, that he is obligated to rebuke him. As it is stated, you shall rebuke, hocheach tochiach, your neighbor. That's the double verb there. Hocheach, you shall surely rebuke. If one rebuked him for his action, but he did not accept the rebuke, from where is it derived that he must rebuke him again? The verse states, you shall rebuke, hocheach tochiach. And the double language indicates that he must rebuke in any case. One might have thought that one should continue rebuking him even if his face changes to humiliation. Therefore, the verse states, do not bear sin because of him. The one giving rebuke may not sin by embarrassing the other person. Okay, an interesting idea here that if you rebuke too much, you could embarrass somebody. And remember, we teach that to publicly embarrass somebody is tantamount to murder in Judaism. So you have to balance, there's always a sense of dignity in how we relate to one another. I don't know if that applies to QAnon, though. I don't have an answer for that one.
So Alan Minton says, I don't hate the alt-right, but I do fear it.
Okay. Kol hakavod. I certainly fear the alt-right, and I have to admit there are times when I feel hatred as well. And I'm sure that there are others who are like me who do feel a sense of seething hatred toward anybody who would do that. But you're right. I think it's healthier to remember that the basis of all hatred is actually fear. Hatred is fear that becomes toxic. And so I think that that's an important point to make as well. Finally, I want to end with this text. The Gemara cites other statements made by Rabbi Ilah in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Ilah said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded, so it is a mitzvah for a person not to say that which will not be heeded. One should not rebuke those who will be unreceptive to his message. Rabbi Abba says it is obligatory for him to refrain from speaking, as it is stated, do not reprove a scorner lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. So how do we apply that teaching in our world today? Is this saying we should not speak out against QAnon because they simply are not, they certainly won't hear our rebuke? Should we remain silent? What's the answer? And honestly, I don't know the answer. I don't know. That doesn't seem like that's the teaching of the moment for me. Particularly in a democracy, in what's left of our democracy, right? I don't think that in a moment like this in our society that we have the luxury of not calling out one who is preaching evil and attempting to manipulate others into acting in evil ways. We have lived and seen too much as the Jewish people since the days of Yevamot in the Talmud. To allow evil to go without a public rebuke, no matter who it embarrasses, no matter who it discomfits, that we have that obligation.
We have a few coming in. Is it permissible to pray for QAnon when saying the prayer for the ill? Rebuke those on the fence who are still receptive. Perhaps not to respond with hate and anger, which is super hard, but to respond with fact-based discussion. The case of the Jews who showed love to neo-Nazis to the point where some neo-Nazis repented and now preach against their former ways. It's good to use humanity and gentle engagement.
I appreciate that. I really do. I don't know. It seems to me that people who don't want to hear something certainly aren't interested in facts. I don't think that what QAnon represents is something that's based in fact. In fact, I want to end, this is from the same article. This is toward the end of the article. It says, many people are perplexed at how any rational person could fall for such an irrational conspiracy theory. But modern social science shows that people in groups don't always think rationally. They respond to fear and terror. They blame their misfortunes on scapegoats. They support narcissistic demagogues they hope will rescue them. In the 1930s, millions of Europeans were unemployed. Violent battles between Nazis and communists raged in city streets. Democratic governments were powerless. Fascist dictators ruled Spain and Italy. Hitler took power in Germany and conquered Western Europe. Stalin's communists conquered the East. The Hitler-Stalin pact sealed totalitarian rule over most of Europe. It took World War II and the deaths of millions to defeat the Nazis' genocidal tyranny, and another 50 years to free the gulags of the Soviet Union. Today, the American people suffer from a plague. Millions of Americans have lost their jobs. Angry mobs roam American cities and battle militarized police and heavily armed militias. The American government seems to be paralyzed. Dictators rule Russia and China. Islamic fascists rule Saudi Arabia and the old Ottoman and Persian empires. The American president appeases Russia, scapegoats China for the pandemic, and looks for other ways as Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman murder their opponents. Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican candidate from Georgia, who has endorsed QAnon's views, is likely to win a seat in Congress. The president praises her as a future Republican star. Some leading Republicans have begun to speak out against QAnon. Representative Liz Cheney, chairwoman of the House Republican Conference, has denounced QAnon as dangerous lunacy that should have no place in American politics. Republican leaders such as Rabbi Adam Kinzinger and Senator Ben Sasse have also denounced QAnon. Former Governor Jeb Bush has said of QAnon, nut jobs, racist haters have no place in either party. The world has seen QAnon before. It was called Nazism. And QAnon Nazism wants a comeback. You know, one of the things that I take from that article, that to wrap it up, is that there is tochacha happening within the Republican Party, isn't there? You're seeing it. You know, the Republican Party that was once, you know, one of the great representatives of American values, there are those who are still defending it and who want to see it represent that. But now those voices are under attack from the very top echelons of our society. So we have to encourage all those who have a voice, particularly on the right, to call out the pernicious rise of Nazi thinking again in this country. And indeed, it is not a rational thing. You can appeal to reason. And maybe that's what the rabbis were trying to say in Help the Enemy Load Their Donkey. Because if you try to argue facts, they're not going to hear you. But if you find a way to remind them of your humanity, as well as their own humanity, in that relationship, there is the possibility of a return to the best in their humanity. The most important thing, as our tradition teaches us, though, is that we must never forget our own humanity at all costs, because only then is there hope of any kind that all humanity can find peace and sanity once again.